Okay, cool. So yeah, I started with, yeah, we discussed a few different
Yeah,
texts, and then this was the order you
yeah,
recommended. So I started with Beyond Good and Evil.
yeah,
We don't need to go through it now. I'm even happy at some point to go through it in the same way that we went through
yeah,
on Truth and Lies. But
yeah.
so far, that's my experience, is what I just described.
Well,
Discouraging, very challenging.
well, I would say for now, just don't read entirety of Nietzsche. Like you don't even need to read whole books to really say you're reading him. Like you could read, I don't know, like 5 pages and put it off for like a couple months. I mean, I know Nietzsche is quite difficult because there's a lot of context with it, but you can sometimes feel you make progress just by reading portions at a time and not feeling like it's got to be integrated because he writes in a manner that you don't need to be like formulating all together at once. You could read it like in portions, like a passage a day if you wanted,
Okay.
and get through it rather than like a studying, because I don't know if you really study Nietzsche. He's very nuanced the way he writes. There's also your style of reading as well, but
Right.
I think maybe at this point it's just better to go in portions because you're right. He does need a lot of context, I think, with other philosophers to really see what he's saying. Because without that background, something is like, why is he even saying that? Who cares? But if you knew what he was addressing, you see why he cares.
I have a few possible solutions then, and then you can tell me which ones. So
Yeah,
one would be, so I guess is identifying what else I can read that would add the most. Let me see how I word this. Um, uh, best prerequisite knowledge to make him easy. It's
yeah,
I don't think it's going to be easy, but you know what I mean.
yeah,
Like, so for example,
yeah.
maybe because you did mention Leonard Peikoff's course, The History of Philosophy, so maybe
Yes.
that would be like the highest leverage point. I'm just sort of giving you an idea of what
Yeah,
I'm
that
thinking.
gives you a lot of at least understanding of what the philosophical issues are in history, and like Nietzsche references all of them practically, like the
Okay,
basic like Heraclitus and evidence of the senses and things like that.
yeah,
He'll
that's what I
reference it
got.
directly. Yeah,
That's what I got because he's using all these terms and I have no idea what he's
yeah,
talking about, and then it makes it difficult.
yeah,
That's what's making it so difficult to read.
yes,
Okay, so is there anything else? So I've got history of philosophy. So maybe it would mean go start with this. Do you agree? Start with this and then come
yeah.
back to Beyond Good and Evil.
Or sometimes depending on your preference, some people like to just read like a primer on the philosopher. And I know some books that just give you talk about him without. I'm trying to think. I don't know anyone offhand. I can find some book
Okay.
intro books if you want it. Like with Aristotle, sometimes it's just good to read an intro book, just because sometimes it makes it easier sometimes.
Right, right. Like I read the Mortimer Adler's so far on
Yeah,
Aristotle. Okay,
yeah,
so I might start with, because I wanted to do, you recommended this anyway. What I might
yeah,
do is this, and then we can cover that. I might just go through each one and then ask you some questions on
yeah.
whatever questions I have on that. And then I come back to Beyond Good and Evil.
Yeah, as far as history of philosophy goes, that will set context for many other philosophers too. So you
Right.
get a lot of mileage out of that
Okay, cool.
for sure.
That's what I'm looking for. The mileage. What's the,
Yeah.
if you want the fundamental that'll then help with everything else that I go through in
Yes.
these two. Okay, so history
Yes.
of philosophy we've got.
Yeah.
The second solution I had is page by page reading. I don't know if you want to do that with me. I'm happy to do that. That's similar to what we did when I went through on, like I said earlier, on Truth and Lies, and I just highlight like basically everything. And we might even go through a small amount every time we have a session. And then I can ask you
Yeah.
questions like, what is he talking about? What do you think of that as a solution as well?
That's not as much mileage, but I
Okay.
think that's more when you're getting, well, I mean, I would recommend the history of philosophy first, or at least
Okay. Okay.
several of that part of
All
it.
right.
I mean, it's long, you don't even need to do all of it, but at
Yeah.
least up to Aristotle, that would probably be enough to at least get some basic stuff that matter, and the rest I could point to you as we go, depending on how important certain parts are. I mean, I know enough Nietzsche at least to know which sort of passages to look at. If
Got
you have
it.
specific types of topics you want to analyze
I
or
just
think
wanted to read
about.
his books and know what he's
Oh,
talking
just a
about.
straight read then.
Well, to
Yeah,
know what he's
page by
talking about too, not to just read it and go,
yeah,
oh yeah, one thing out of 50 things that he said, I get.
yeah. Then either genealogy, morality, or well, Twilight of the Idols is actually probably easier to read than Beyond Good and Evil, but it's like any of the 1, 2, or 3 is it's just whichever you like more.
Okay.
The genealogy and morality is more like 3 big essays. Beyond Good and Evil is easier to read in parts because it's like more aphorisms than, or they're kind of large aphorisms. And 2 is pretty thin and the easiest to get through as far as length goes. Beyond Good and Evil is much bigger and more dense.
Right. All right. So, okay. And I've done it in this order. So here we go, right? 1 is solution going forward. Go through. So begin with history of philosophy as a course. So then, then I'll come back. So I'm going to do that, and then we can integrate that into sessions.
Yeah.
So I've done them in order, right? A page by page reading with you.
Yeah.
But then the third solution, which is actually different, would be skip this for now and just go to Aristotle first. I don't know. I haven't read Aristotle, but I assume there is, I don't know, there's obviously going to still be context, but it's not this. Nietzsche's like all philosophical context, right? So
yeah, like he's mostly speaking in as responses to things usually.
right.
He's responding to his world or other philosophers and saying that the world is being ruined basically by the philosophers or politicians or moralizers.
So what are your thoughts then on maybe I should go to, I wanted to read Nietzsche, but I can just see it's too, I'm fine, like I said, too challenging. So what are your thoughts then? So history of philosophy obviously is part of it, but then should I, instead of doing, Nietzsche first, maybe Aristotle first?
I think Aristotle first is usually easier because
Okay,
you don't need as much context. I mean, after all, Aristotle can, the most he responds to is like Democritus and Heraclides, and he doesn't have anyone else to respond to. It's not like there's Kant or Hume or anything. That's why he's easier, less context to put in, and more observational. It's less about something you already know. It's more about like inquiry into the world anyway. So it's easier in that sense.
Right, so maybe I'll reverse this and I'll do, and then come back to Nietzsche. That will do that. How about that as a solution?
That makes more sense.
All right, cool. I wanted to, but I can, it's too hard. So let's do that then.
It took me a while to get into Nietzsche. Like I read That's Supposed to Sutra, and it was a while before I read anything else. I even tried like Human All Too Human, and I gave up on it. It was until like 2014 that I even started reading him. It was at least 3 years before I started to read anything by him.
Okay. I'd like to, you took 3 years, but I'm going to try and learn from your mistakes and errors and the things you learned so I can speed up the process, right?
For sure.
Okay, so this is what I'm going to do then. Yeah, I'll start the highest leverage point, history of philosophy, come back to Aristotle with you. We can do readings on that. And then whenever the hell I've done that, I'll come back to Nietzsche and we can do the page by page readings, or at least try and see what happens.
As for the history of philosophy, at least there's like 4 lectures on Aristotle. So once those are done, you'd be good to start Aristotle reading if you wanted, especially you would like be doing multiple things at once. Or accomplishing a lot at once.
All right, sounds good to me. All right. Let's see. I wanted to ask you about, a while ago I mentioned I'm trying to write essays or learn to write essays in a reflective, like reflecting on fiction is one instance of essays. And I wanted to discuss that with you, actually, what I'm doing, and get some suggestions and thoughts if you have any. And if not, we'll come back to these other random questions.
Yeah.
I'm going to bring up a document that I've been working on. One sec.
Just to mention some things, I have one passage by Nietzsche about evidence of the senses. If you want to talk about that today, or we could do that another time. I'm just telling you I have.
Sorry, what do you have?
Nietzsche about evidence of the senses. I have like 2 paragraphs of stuff.
Let's I've put that down as yes,
yeah.
I'll put that down as a dot point, and because I've got some stuff we can cover today, and then we can cover it also in the
yes.
Yeah, maybe we'll do that. I'll put that in. Cool. Yeah. So yeah, let's go through this extraction essay. I'll get your thoughts on that, and then we can come back to this document here.
Yeah.
Okay, one sec. I will switch. How do I? I'm just setting up another document. Okay, so I've been trying to write an essay on Musashi. That's one book, and there's other books that I'm going to write an essay on as well, like from a philosophical perspective. And my thinking on that is, people read, I think they're called sermons, right? Like you read a passage from the Bible or a parable, and then you use that as a kind of reference or an image of a morality you want to embody, and it's memorable and it's powerful. And so I was trying to do the same thing with fiction, or I'm trying to do the same thing with fiction.
Yeah.
And so the way I do that is I'm reading a book, and then instead of just enjoying the book, which is good, I'm also later trying to go, okay, well, what were the principles in the book? Like either implicit or explicit, like what principles did the characters embody? What principles were relevant? And the assumption is that I already believe these principles are true. I'm just being shown in a concrete form what they look like when embodied. And then I'm trying to practice thinking about it explicitly, articulating it, writing about it. And so I've come to it. There's a few problems. So one is, if I read a 1,000-page book, like Atlas Shrugged might be a good example. Musashi is a good example because it's also 1,000 pages. Like I don't know how to grapple with it. Like I've extracted all these quotes as an example, and I've tried to put them in kind of broader categories or concepts, like, method of observation, epistemology, worldview, metaphysics. And then my plan is to write a bit about them. So for example, here I've got all these quotes, right, that I want to integrate. But it's kind of overwhelming. Like I don't really know how to take a whole story and write an essay about it. Do you have any thoughts or suggestions on how you, like, I don't know, when you're writing an essay about Atlas Shrugged, how do you, because there's so much in there, like how do you kind of summarize it and write an essay about it? I don't know.
That is hard because I've entered the Atlas Shrugged essay contest before, and that is really hard. So it's really hard, but there's 2 ways you could approach it. Well, one is when you first read it, you could have just like a notepad, just write down like a key concept that hits you, just write it down, and then keep reading without, you don't need to reflect on it at the time, just like write it down, maybe the page number where you thought of it, and then come back to it. That way you at least have a reference in your memory, or you have a reference that you can use to jog your memory once you want to write about it or reflect more on it. I mean, that's one thing you could do. Another would be, like, say after you've read the book already and you just want to go back to it and just look for things to talk about. On some level, I think has to be, one, what do you even think of as relevant about the book without looking at it? Like if I just ask you what's good about the book or what was interesting, you should be able to at least say a few things, whatever they might be. And from that, you can then start looking for expanding on those examples in the book of where you saw that. just expanding on it. I mean, of course, as you look about it or think about it, you'll come up with more principles and relationships in the book. It also depends on exactly what you're trying to figure out. I mean, you're just trying to understand or find some philosophical background in, or what is your objective exactly by
My
writing
object,
this?
yeah. So my objective with all the essays is it's going to be similar to, as I said, the kind of thing religious people do with Bible stories,
Yes.
which is you have a story and you're looking at it from the perspective of what principles or lessons are there to be taken from this, and then being able to, you like, by reflecting on it and articulating your thoughts and trying to mentally arrange them through the writing process, you then are able to much more easily retain, I don't know, the specific scene, the story, the plot, the thing you want to,
Right.
and the principle. So it gives you, like, this is a theory. I don't know how this will actually play out because I haven't written these essays yet. But the theory is that, oh, maybe I can get to the point where, for different principles, I have all these really nice condensed artistic images of the principle, and then that will help guide me in my thinking and choices and actions or whatever day to day. That's the broader purpose. Is that a good answer to your question, or do you want more?
I think so. It is more about, like, I do see what you're getting at. The hard part is not overwhelming yourself, because there could be a lot of things. And on some level, I think you need to just pick a few things that just stuck out to you, maybe like three events that are important to you that you could just tell me about right now, that you don't need to open the book up.
Right.
It's a long book, so I'm sure a few things stuck out.
Right.
And that's, I think, the best thing to start with. You start working with what really stood out, the things that are clear in your mind already. And by looking at those passages or sections, you might be able to go remind yourself of other things, like, oh, why did he do this in relation to this character? Oh, because of something else, some other conflict they had, something that was building up that led to a fight at this point. So you might say, oh, this fight was really cool. But then you look at the nature of the fight, like, these two people are fighting. You might ask, well, what's the nature of this character's psychology, the other person's psychology? There's something about their philosophy. You might not get all that immediately, but you might be able to notice one principle or two when you're doing that for a few scenes. I think the best thing is usually to work from particular scenes that stood out to you or held importance, and then break those down without overwhelming yourself, like, oh, what's in the book? Well, start with the themes or the events that mattered to you,
Right.
that stood out to some extent already. That will help your memory as well.
Okay. What I experience is that there are a lot of, I can read a book and there are a lot of Atlas Shrugged, Fountainhead, Musashi, Jack London, and there are things that stand out, but I don't know necessarily what the principle is. And that's another part in this process of, like, practicing identifying essentials and principles by looking at something I don't understand. And then, do you remember ages ago we had a session and I read this little passage about a chinless samurai, and I was trying to ask you, what is the principle? Yeah, so that kind of thing is what I'm going for as well.
Yeah, I'm trying to say I think there's a balance between picking the right examples, but also knowing how to pick the examples. I think often you just need to pick one and start analyzing, just trying. Because, I mean, you can't discover what's true until you start with what you don't know. You can't say, oh, I know what I'm looking for. Well, then why would you be looking? You'd already know the answer. You wouldn't even need to do the assignment or the essay.
Right.
I think the nature of doing that essay implies that there is something you're not sure about. So you just start working from something that there's something there. You can almost extract a philosophical principle out of almost anything. So it's really a matter of, one, is the story even any good to be worth analyzing? And so far, it does seem like a really worthwhile book to get philosophy thoughts out of it. And two, because of that, you can pretty sure that whatever example you pick, there'll be something integrated, something to analyze and look at.
Right. How
And
do
with
I, yeah, sorry.
practice, and then with practice, you'll be able to like be able to pick better examples quicker, or analyze it faster, or pick better examples sooner, or integrate more information overall as you
Okay.
read stories.
We can do this on an ongoing basis. I'm trying to do it with all,
Yeah.
it takes me ages. Like I've been working on this for easily like 9 hours. But this is where I have trouble because you can see how many quotes are in here, and I've also written up some of my own stuff. But one thing I have trouble with is, especially with a big book, Atlas Shrugged, Musashi, is that there is so much in there. How do I, let's say I want to identify what the theme is, or what the driving, the essential philosophy of a character is, especially in the case of a less consistent characterization. Like there's less consistent characterizations in this book, just by the nature of the person, the person who wrote it, the Japanese morality at the time. And so there's a lot of conflicting elements. And so then being able to, it's like, in order for me to make a claim that let's say the overall motivating philosophy or driver of a character is this, I need to refer to quotes and all kinds of things that happen in a book. But 1,000 pages is like, that's a lot of stuff for me to, even after I finish reading it, I can't, at least I don't have the memory to go, there was this and this and this and that scene and the essential is this. Like, there's no way I can do that. And I do highlight, as you said. I've got everything's on Kindle, so that's fine. But then once I've dumped all the highlights, it's literally like, there's like hundreds of them, and I have no idea how to integrate all that to then find, okay, here's the essential theme. Here's the essential driving philosophy of this character, even though he said all these other things. Like I don't even, yeah, that's what I'm struggling with. What are your thoughts on that?
I think you might be reducing it too much to the content of the sentences, and less
Okay.
about the material, the content of the events in an analogical way. Like, I think causality is in terms of whole entities, not just a series of events. Simply put, it's not just a billiard ball hits another, it's just a series of hitting things. It's about the nature of the billiard balls being hit. In a similar way, I think it's about the nature of the particular events, not just as things happening, but what is it that it's about? I'm trying to think of it in a better way.
Well,
Don't reduce it to just the text as much as a complete set of events, like a totality, rather than maybe just a series of sentences. That's almost what it seems like. If you're quoting a lot like that, can be overwhelming when it just starts to feel like a lot of sentences in your head without any particular integration. Does that make sense?
Sort of, because let me give you an example of why I think that the sentences, at least what I'm doing, why I think that the specific quotes are important. Because, for example, okay, let me go to, I'll just give you one or two paragraphs, and you'll see what I mean. So you can have like, how do I go? Okay, there we go. This is my writing, and then we'll go to a quote. All right, let's just take something. Okay, so you'll get in this text things like, a character will say women are evil because the Buddha himself said, like, let me see if I find something that's condensed. Okay, the Bodhisattva Nagujana, which you mentioned to me a while ago, who feared women as much as Buddha did. And then there's all these things about, like just random weird like ideas or viewpoints on morality, where like women are bad and sex is bad, or even the desire for sex is bad. But then you'll get, for example, so you get that, and then you'll get something like this, which is why I'm pulling out the quote. So in this quote, you don't have to read this. I'll find the relevant passage to you. He's sitting in front of the mountain. He's saying, "Oh, it's magnificent," and he's suddenly feeling like, I'm so small, how can I attach any importance to the accomplishments in the world? And he's just thinking about this. And then he suddenly has this moment where he says this, if you want to read this passage that I've highlighted.
Yeah, I read it.
Yeah. So like, to me, that seems more important than say how he might act or what he might say about sexual desire. But you've got to have those quotes in mind to be able to make that judgment, right?
I'm not sure about that
Okay.
because I know I don't even like what I do in my mind, at least when I reflect upon literature, is I have the character in mind. I don't even think about things they said as much as how I know what they are like psychologically. But I guess I might be begging the question because in a way I've already picked out some sort of essential way that they function or essential element of their psychology that I then use to figure out what they would say about some whatever it might be, whether it's about ethics or about women or about preferences in building styles, like
Right.
which might happen in the Fountainhead.
Right.
I think a lot of it is a matter of making yourself boil it down to fewer things. Like, I don't know, say if you had 5 quotes, can you integrate them into like one type of idea? Or that's not always possible, but like in a way to reduce the content. Like, think about the co-epistemology. Like, in what ways can you relate into ideas as similar and integrate them as like one idea? And I think that's one important way to make sure your memory doesn't get overwhelmed. I think overwhelmed memory is the biggest issue and why it might seem difficult, but also why even use principles, because it reduces all that content, makes it easier to remember.
Right. I agree with that. I think that's what I've been trying to do in organize all these, because originally it was there was a lot of quotes and I've been organizing them into these. They're not that great of categories yet, but I've been trying to. And then so I've grabbed all these quotes, let's say, this is my method so far. I grabbed all these quotes, which is an enormous amount, and then I've been sorting them into categories. And then later
Yeah.
I'll get into each category and start, reflecting on it in my own words and then do what you say. But that's the process so far. It does feel a bit overwhelming because I literally start with the bare quotes. It's like I'm starting from the ground up, from the examples, from the text, from the things people do, the actions, the scenes,
Yeah.
the quotes, as opposed to starting with trying to just start from the abstract and top down in the beginning, which I'm weary of because I'm trying to make it evidence-based, meaning based on the things that happen in the book and then drawing conclusions from them rather than just to avoid superimposing something onto the text that isn't really there.
Yeah. Yeah, I know what you mean. It
Okay.
also depends on the particular book. How much do you want to integrate into your understanding? I mean, Atlas Shrugged to me is like like for me, I would integrate it more than others.
Right.
But if it was a book by Robert Heinlein, which I enjoy a lot, I'm not going to put as much time into deep analysis.
Right.
So it really depends also on the particular book and how important it is to judge if the work you're doing is worth the time.
Well,
So it's a matter of like, this book seems like it has a lot of good content though. So
I'm trying to do it on every book, but I guess I think that in the process, if I'm right and it does help me, as I thought, as I said in my theory, which is it's like functions as a sort of biblical parable that you can recall and
yes,
that strengthens your understanding of a principle or ideas because you've got these strong images, then I'd do it with every book, but obviously different books will have different you if
yeah,
it well one if you improve in the process, then it shouldn't take as long as it does at the start, and two,
right.
different books will demand different kinds of levels of thought. So
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I think that makes sense.
So
And yeah, I mean,
yeah, sorry.
you'd be surprised that when you do something a lot, you'll be surprised that one day it just, oh, it's easy, Like it happens with anything as much as it might seem like it won't ever happen. Like once you start focusing on like principles and things like that, eventually with practice, it'll start to congeal better and
Right.
everything starts to be, you remember everything better and it all
Right.
builds on it.
Right. Okay, so I'm going to keep working on this, and we could even when I've cleaned it up way more, we can review it.
But I will
There,
say, I think it's the right idea that you had some quotes and you're organizing them by whatever topic. I think that's part of the process of relating the ideas and organizing them in some manner rather than
right,
just a list of quotes. That way, at least puts it in a context and relevance to you and how you will remember them. Because it is about how finding those examples for yourself, but also working up from them and not having a predefined thing you're looking for. You're working up inductively, so to speak.
do you know of any good material on how to think about summarizing the story in terms of plot theme and summarizing it so it's true to the story and you don't unintentionally superimpose what you enjoyed onto the book, and then even being able to differentiate how integrated a book is versus some books might have different like I don't know if you'll be able to summarize it into one large integration. Like for example, Atlas Shrugged you might summarize as, I had to have someone tell me this, or I had to read it before I got it. I know it's true now, but the role of man's mind in his existence, that can be integrated into that, but not all
Yeah.
books will have that kind of level
Mhm.
of integration. So are there any good materials or resources on how to, when you read a book, to actively think about that and go through a process where you are able to summarize the plot theme accurately like that?
I don't know any offhand, but what I would do to find the answer, we'll look at literature syllabuses, literature syllabi of different universities, or maybe any of the free ones out there. Just download the syllabus and see what sort of assignments they have. As soon
Right.
as I find that's useful to work out through things, because just looking at their assignments gives you ideas of
Right.
how to approach your own assignments. I
Okay.
think that helps a lot. But I don't know any particular resources, and I don't have much experience in doing it other
Okay.
than as a writer myself, but it's a different beast to say what the themes are and analyzing them.
Right.
I just approach it like philosophy, but if you want the more literary approach or specific principles unique to literature, yeah, I look elsewhere. Like I know there's well, Rand had good examples, I think, in the art of fiction writing.
Mm.
I think that had some
Okay.
use. And I
Right.
know Beakoff probably did something with it.
So one thing I'm trying to do as well is, so the primary motivation is, at the first pass, would be writing for myself to
Yeah.
extract value from the text. If I find that, hey, this doesn't actually work, like, yeah, I've summarized, I've mentally thought through different events, characters, motivating philosophies, and it's not that, it doesn't add that much value to the way I think, then I'll just drop it. But so far, what I'm thinking is to write for myself, but then also do a second pass where I write for a general audience.
Yeah.
And so I've got to figure, maybe I'll ask you questions when I get to that point, because right now I haven't got to that point yet. So, okay, let me see what else to, where are my questions?
I do think one of the better ways to think about literature is either, well, is in wholes, as in think about entire characters and think
Yeah.
about large scale events. and then just connect them. Like you could break down on a particular event, let's just say in Atlas Shrugged, there's trying to think of an example. Let's say when Dagny, I'm trying to think of a good example, a good event. Let's say the particular event is the first ride on the John Galt line.
Yep.
With Dagny and Reardon. I think that's like a good example of something to work from. See, how did they get there? Like what led to this point? How do the characters respond to this event? What sort of event things do they talk about at this point? I mean, it's not even looking at what they say, it's just piecing together the things that make this event real. What brought this event into actuality? What was in nature what the characters did, said, or believed? It's working out from the whole of an event rather than, say, an individual thing somebody said or a quick event that happened, but rather the large context of something and seeing how it connects. And I find that also more interesting to be like, oh, how did they get here? What I mean, it's not just trying to find a philosophy in it, but what caused this event to occur? How do you explain why this event came about?
So I find that in thinking about events, it's hard for me after I've read the book, let's say, especially if it's a big book, it might be quite difficult for me to recall all the facts around it unless I go back through the book. You know what I'm saying? Like memory wise, I can't recall all the details around a specific event.
Yeah.
So that's one.
It is. That's the hard part. Yeah. And that's the part actually I have trouble with sometimes too, making sure I have all the relevant events.
You know, I've seen a thread kind of finding the absurdities in the Bible on Objectivist Forum, but I was thinking like I found a lot of the Bible boring when I did read it at school, and I forgot all of it. But if it's such a popular, if it's so popular and influential and powerful, and a lot of people did take up religion, there is something right that's being done in the way the ideas are communicated, right? Like you can say that.
I think so.
And so I wonder if there's a way to learn from what are they, sermons? Is that what they do when they go through a parable? Is that what it's called? I don't know.
Usually any sermon is about a parable, or they'll bring in parables to help make the point. I mean, that's very common in
so maybe we can learn from that. And if we're speaking about an event, it might mean, okay, this is a large, very integrated text. It might mean you do have to go through it a few times. That's just how it is.
Sometimes,
it's not the case that you should, unless you're Shebeshevsky, then you've got a Shebeshevsky, whatever his name, or your Funes de Memorias, then you've got to go through it a few times.
Yeah.
When you say whole, you've got to think about it in terms of wholes. How does that relate to what I said earlier though? Because when the reason I'm trying to think of it on the level of quotes and specific passages is because I find that I'm trying to make the whole from that, as opposed to make the whole simply from the summarized feeling that I have about the character.
Well, I think that's why wholes are better applied to like large scale events or major plot points as events, because I mean, that way, or at least you're working from specifically the evidence in the book without any assumption of what it means to you, just taking the event for what it is and then taking it apart. And I think that helps you to focus on principles or essentials. Not that the quotes don't get you thinking in important ways, but I think it makes it easy to fall into a concrete bound way of thinking. where you
Right.
just got a list of quotes, and
Right.
that's the thing to avoid, and that's a difficult thing. And I think, or at least organizing quotes maybe related to events or principles could help.
So you think you should, it's better to integrate things around events or integrate the quotes
Yes.
around a particular
Yeah.
large event. What
Yeah,
would
if
you
the
consider?
quotes are
Yeah.
meaningful to you, I would do that. I mean, clearly the quotes matter to you, so I wouldn't ignore them because like they tell you something. But you also want to be careful not to just take everything that sounds cool, because I know what that's like too. Sometimes you highlight everything that sounds cool, you might just end up with a page that's just yellow. That's what happens to me. So
Well, it means you're
you
reading a
gotta
good book
just,
at least.
yeah. But sometimes you just gotta be careful and just decide like, I'm not taking all of them. I'm trying to find more essential ones, not just the ones that seemed useful, but really essential or very useful.
Right.
And I do think that large scale events usually helps. The same with
Right.
studying history. I think studying history is a similar way. You got to organize around specific large scale events, whatever that might mean, but it helps your memory for sure.
Yeah. Okay. And then what would you say? How would you identify a large scale event?
Um, Sometimes it's obvious when, I mean, I know it's a terrible answer, but when I think an Atlas Shrugged, like when the Continental Line broke down and hundreds of people died, like that was a big event. Or when Dalt was tortured, or when Francisco gave the money speech and things like that. But in a way, it's what would seem to have the biggest impact on the plot. You could often find that in a plot synopsis if you're not sure which to pick. I mean, there's usually most books will have that anyway. Even if you look on Wikipedia, you'll be able to see, oh, this plot point was big, so maybe I should analyze this one.
Yeah. Okay. So I agree with that. That makes sense. Look for the events which have the largest impact on the development of the plot going forward.
Yes.
Okay.
And often it can help if, depending on the book, it might help to have somebody else look at their analysis.
Yeah.
Like I've seen people write on like Poe a lot. Well, actually, I haven't, but I'm trying to think of an example. Like
Edgar Allan
Kafka.
Poe. Oh, Kafka.
Kafka.
Yeah.
Or something. Like it helps me to see what he's saying by looking at like an intro in the translation by the translator. It's like, oh, now I see what was going on better than before.
Right. Okay. Let's see what else I've got in here that I wanted to. Yeah, I mean, I think I'll spend more time working on this, trying to get a process for doing it, and we can go over it again when I've done that, and you can tear it apart. All right. Let me get up a new window.
Yeah.
Well, we have 15 minutes. Do you reckon that's enough time to go through this Nietzsche's passage, or should we go through just smaller questions?
It's not long.
Yeah.
It's
okay,
not
cool.
long. I'll give you the link in here. It's just two short ones. There's a longer one, but it's not actually such a different topic.
You read this book, by the way?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yeah, I read it.
Thoughts?
Twilight Idols.
No, the one I just pasted with
I didn't see that.
bold.
No, never heard of it.
Okay, all right, cool.
I put it in chat. You could read number 5. No, 3. Actually, read number 3 and 4. And that should be enough. They're different, so you can stop after 3.
should I pause and ask you questions now, or just read through?
Yeah. Yeah, let's talk about number 3 then.
Yeah. Okay. So
Well, I wanted to mention first, like as a way of reading Nietzsche, I don't always think of just what is the one thing he's trying to say here. Usually I think about that he's criticizing the way the world is around him. And he's usually also trying to find the truth in what's out there. Well, maybe that's a bad way to phrase it, but it's really that Nietzsche is just analyzing the way the world has become. He's not just saying a philosophical principle, but he's usually making fun of or targeting current philosophers in contrast to what they have forgotten or what they have lost sight of.
Right. And so what does he mean when he says what remains is abortive and not yet science? Like, okay, so the scientific triumphs depend on the evidence of the senses, and we've learned to follow them, but then what remains is abortive and not yet science. That is to say, metaphysics, theology, psychology, epistemology.
In a way, you could be saying that we've not made any triumphs in those areas precisely because they don't trust evidence of the senses. They become abortive. Because when we think about metaphysics and epistemology and formal science and logic, it's almost entirely divorced of perception or evidence of the senses. At that time, especially, like Kant would be that way. Like they're all detached and rationalistic. I mean, they've forgotten about the evidence of the senses, and those fields have become almost abortive. And it is fine to take Nietzsche in a interpretive way generally, because even in many ways encourages people not just to take what he says, but just look at what he says. If it brings you to a different place, then it might seem like he's going sometimes. That's just fine. But the key, I think, is when reading something like this is take something, like maybe a simple statement he's making, that he clearly respects the senses. And he's trying to say, like, you could always be aware that he's always critical of people like Kant who take everything in just like a Platonic, formal, out of this world sort of way. And that's usually what he's often trying to say. So you can interpret it in that way. Like imagine Rand talking about like, oh, the senses are how we know everything, and the necessary element for science. But she would probably equally say that metaphysics and epistemology have been lost to rationalism, and that they're like dead sciences now, but they could be saved or whatever if we take Aristotle seriously and things like that.
What I'm confused by here, so he is saying that the scientific triumphs we have attained extend precisely so far as we have accepted the evidence of our senses. But I thought he was anti the senses, like it's everything is that, even from reading that on Truth and Lies, all our concepts are just it's a kind of playing with reality and just making things up and building up these honeycomb towers on top of reality. And so this is kind of like, I didn't expect that he's now saying that, oh, okay,
well,
accept the evidence of your senses. That is what makes things powerful.
I would suggest that Nietzsche is thinking of evidence of the senses to be used in a different way, that he doesn't respect those who use that evidence to construct those, I guess, floating towers, we could say. That people are using it for that purpose is wrong. Evidence to the senses to Nietzsche seems to be more like taking what's before you and just accepting it, like, or even in your own nature, if you, whatever it might be that you see in yourself, you can accept that it's more associations and things like that. And he's saying take a look at those senses more and don't think about reason as much. In a way, it's like almost concrete bound, but not totally, because he's kind of aware that not everything is merely concrete,
right?
But he's making some distinction about the world in front of you is important in some way.
Right.
Nietzsche ignores reason as an aspect of using your senses.
Right.
But either way, he still cares about the senses. He's of this world. He's right or wrong about his view on reason. What he wants is earthly spirituality, like grounded here on earth, rather
Right.
than in God or the rational above, the Platonic rational world. He wants a sort of world here,
Right.
which, although he does think he is more skeptical than about reason than Rand ever would be, he almost rejects it, but doesn't reject it per se, but he doesn't think it matters nearly as much. It's just a thing that you could use or not.
Okay. A thing you use to manipulate other people. That's part of it.
And often it could take you away from your more basic nature or instincts or whatever he would say. But that's in a way acknowledging that rationalism is anti-life, like of Kant.
Yeah.
But of course, this is before Rand and all that. So in a way, we could say that it was a first step in rejecting this sort of mystical code of thinking or mystical way of thinking throughout Europe and Western civilization, despite its successes.
What this latter part, this last sentence. Okay, so he's saying in these fields, so metaphysics, theology, psychology, reality does not come into consideration at all, even as a problem. What does that mean, as a problem?
That's a translation thing.
And then just as
I don't know
little
if he's saying
does the question concerning the general value of such a convention of symbols as logic.
Well, I think he's saying people often don't even question the value of what they're doing. They just take it for granted. That is automatically a value. Like,
okay, yeah, that makes
question
sense.
It. But also, it's like, do they even care about reality? No. Just if the premises are consistent, are they merely coherent? Which is nothing to say about reality. I mean, okay, they're coherent. Now what? So, like, what use is that for me? Like, what good is that for will to power, whatever it is that Nietzsche cares about? It's like it's a floating abstraction. Does nothing.
Okay. Okay, I understand. I'll read 4.
Yeah, 4. That one 4 is easier to understand, I think.
I like the way he writes. There's often references that I laugh at. I don't fully get, like he's referring to philosophers as frogmen and just all kinds of, he's saying they're like frogs and all kinds of strange things. Okay. I found this more difficult. I got some of it. Like, okay, so there's these groups of philosophers at the time taking, it's again referring to, or in objectivist terms, rationalism, taking an idea which is not derived from the senses, but reached through intuition or feeling, and then trying to make that self-consistent with other ideas. But there's a lot in here that I didn't get. Yeah, so I found this more difficult, I think, than the first passage. Okay.
Well, you're right on the rationalism part. I mean, so he's saying they put the appearance last. I take that to mean that what you see is taken, the senses are taken last, like
Yeah.
as if it makes any sense to end with your sense. You should begin there. At least
Right.
that's what is there in front of you. That's what the world is.
Right.
And so he's saying that you start with like this empty concept if you do that, which is a floating abstraction in objectivist terms.
Yeah.
And he says then, oh, you get like the good, the truth, those are those platonic forms in a way, that those high concepts you begin away from the senses. And you integrate those into something even emptier. I mean, imagine connecting, integrating two floating abstractions. You're just saying like, you put together goodness, truth, and perfection, put that into God. God is even more empty than those ideas. He's almost going at a criticism of God that not only are these concepts further from or taken away from the world we see, but they're even used as justification for the existence of God. In a way, God itself is empty of any meaning for that reason.
I just looked up causa sui.
Yeah,
The
it's
cause
its
of
own
itself.
cause.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And
And yeah. And then just causes humanity having a brain disease for taking it seriously.
on that, he says they're the brain disease of morbid cobweb spinners. But I thought from Truth and Lies that isn't that the goal, to spin fine webs above a flowing river, and so the webs are like they're
Well,
not.
these are morbid cobweb spinners sounds in contrast to a spider making web in a positive way. I mean, this is more of a negative connotation. It seems to
Okay.
me. When he says
Yeah.
morbid cobweb spinners, I think it's something old and rotting or decaying, the remnants, rather than like you don't even spin a cobweb. You spin a web which gets dusty. So I don't wonder if that means anything here. But
Okay.
it does sound very gross and disgusting.
Right. It does. But there was that reference in Truth and Lies where there was the guy who was building, or humanity building the Columbrium, or that big
Yeah.
beehive-like tower.
Yeah.
And then there was the person who spins a fine web above a flowing river, that so it doesn't, it doesn't get knocked out by the wind, but if a huge wave comes, he has to respin it. So I thought that was a positive in that context, but here it's something else. Okay.
Yeah.
And then there's a few more questions, but we can come back to this. So
yeah, I just wanted to show a few examples just of ways to read Nietzsche.
Yeah, I think we can
dense,
we can go through it more in the future, and I will go. I like analytically questioning everything, because it's not at the beginning. It's in a sense stupid, but by stupid I mean I can't yet make sense of how to think about it in an integrated, essential way. But then by asking those really stupid questions, like I did when I started, I then learn, oh, okay, here's what's important, here's what's not. You know what I'm saying? So we can we can repeat what I did when I started reading about objectivism when I get onto Nietzsche as well, and then I'll improve as we go along.
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend reading this passage, but the number 2, that one's confusing. I read it like twice because like at one point it's like, what are you talking about, Nietzsche? That's how I felt. But it's like, also it goes against what I think already. And I picked easy examples because I agree with him on those. Number 2, I think he's wrong, but he's kind of right, but still pretty wrong.
Okay. All right, that's good. So I've got some plans going forward. Main thing is the history of philosophy, and then these essays, and then from there, Aristotle, then Nietzsche. Okay.
Yes.
Cool. Well, I think I've put in a lesson tomorrow. Whenever it is, I'll see you.
Yep.
Just stop the.
Talk to